Movie sequels get a bad rap, but every now and then one comes along that totally blows its predecessor away. Which comic-based franchise found its direction with the help of a morally ambiguous love interest? Keep watching to find out. Gremlins is a classic, but it's also a dark, cynical little film. It establishes an idyllic It's a Wonderful Life-esque setting, and then has ugly little monsters destroy the whole thing. Gremlins 2: The New Batch is a wholly different animal. It moves the setting to a high-tech skyscraper in New York City, introducing a far zanier cast of gremlins who wreak a much sillier sort of havoc, thanks to a geneticist whose experiments lead to a much wider variety of gremlin shapes and sizes. Gremlins was fun, but as Key and Peele pointed out, Gremlins 2 is completely bananas in a way that makes it awesome.
This is G2, people. We're writing Gremlins 2. It should be a party.
And even all these years later, it's exactly what Hollywood should do whenever it's time to drop a deuce. Chris Hemsworth has always been charismatic and funny as Thor Odinson, the Asgardian god of thunder and the Avengers' resident himbo. In fact, he's probably the best part of 2011's Thor, a movie that has a lot going for it, but never quite lives up to its potential, despite the work of Hemsworth and a star-making turn from Tom Hiddleston as Loki. A mix of mythic fantasy, superhero action, and a fish-out-of-water romantic comedy, it remains less than the sum of its parts, and is perhaps a bit clunkier than it ought to be. The 2013 sequel, Thor: The Dark World, seemed to double down on this clunkiness, with arguably the MCU's worst villain ever and a MacGuffin that made no sense, even for the MCU. Then came the third movie, Thor: Ragnarok, and finally things got on track. Shifting directors from Kenneth Branagh to Alan Taylor to Taika Waititi, these movies clearly reflected whoever was in the chair. Ragnarok brought a Waititi-esque, unorthodox buoyancy to the series that felt like an injection of buttery popcorn directly into the vein. Thor and Loki are relocated far away from both the overwrought fantasy of Asgard and the mundanity of Earth, setting the second act of the movie instead on the weird junkyard planet of Sakaar, ruled by Jeff Goldblum's campy Grandmaster. The MCU had never seen anything like this before. For the first time, Thor and Loki had a plot as fun as their characters, plus the Hulk, played by Mark Ruffalo, and Valkyrie, played by Tessa Thompson, memorably came along for the ride. The stakes were as high as ever, or higher, considering Asgard was being threatened with complete destruction. Nevertheless, the storytelling in Ragnarok allowed for a lot more fun and a level of knowing ridiculousness that helped the whole mythic space gods concept go down just a little bit easier.
I just couldn't help myself. I know. I'm a trickster. Yes, so mischievous.
David Ayer's 2016 Suicide Squad was a mess. To start with, it was the third film in the DCU, arriving the year before Justice League. That meant Ayer had the unenviable task of introducing an entire team of incarcerated supervillains in a world where audiences had barely met any of the superheroes, let alone their enemies. Even though Suicide Squad spends at least half its runtime on multiple sequences designed to introduce the team, most of the characters remain sketchy and underdeveloped at best. When the plot finally does get going, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Furthermore, main villain Enchantress, played by Cara Delevingne, was one of the villains that Amanda Waller, played by Viola Davis, had recruited for the team. So it really calls into question why her idea of a supervillain task force ever seemed like a good idea to anybody.
Needless to say, the whole thing was a bad idea.
Despite being just plain terrible, Suicide Squad did uncover a tremendous hunger for an offbeat film about these DC antiheroes. In the aftermath of Batman vs. Superman, Warner Brothers took footage from Ayer's somber film and put together a fun, breezy trailer that went viral. It was as if someone had made a fan-produced cut of Suicide Squad as a comedy. But the resulting tug-of-war between director and studio ultimately resulted in a disjointed, unsure-of-itself debacle. Enter the king of offbeat. James Gunn's 2021 The Suicide Squad, with the all-important definite article in the title, is a whole lot better. It brings in a bunch of new team members like Bloodsport, played by Idris Elba, and Peacemaker, played by John Cena, all funnier and more well-developed as characters than anybody from the first film. It also capitalized on Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn, who had been the best part of the first movie, and then had another movie in between, Birds of Prey, to develop as a character and gain new fans. With a better script, better cast, better direction, and a clearer sense of the DC Extended Universe as a whole, it's no surprise that The Suicide Squad became a vast improvement over its The Less predecessor. A live-action CGI family movie based on the classic children's character Paddington Bear is exactly the sort of film you'd expect to get made these days. What nobody saw coming was that 2014's Paddington turned out to be absolutely delightful, retaining the quaint charm and warmth of the original stories. It also boasted a truly stellar cast, with Ben Whishaw as the voice of the bear, Sally Hawkins and Hugh Bonneville as the couple that welcomed him into their family, and Nicole Kidman as a villainous taxidermist. The movie charmed both children and adults, earning a truly impressive 97% on Rotten Tomatoes. Paddington was so beloved by its audience that it's all the more impressive that 2017's Paddington 2 turned out to be even better than the first film. It earned an almost unheard of 99% on Rotten Tomatoes that ranks it among the most acclaimed films of all time. Consider this. Paddington and Paddington 2 have a higher cumulative Rotten Tomatoes score than The Godfather at 97% and The Godfather 2 at 96%. The sequel, centered on Paddington being framed for a crime and sent to prison, might sound like a bit of a bummer. However, as the little bear's charisma wins over hardened inmates, it becomes the sort of film that renews your faith in humanity, humor, love, and kindness. With Hugh Grant and Brendan Gleeson joining the already impressive cast, Paddington 2 might be as perfect a family film as you're ever likely to see. Magic Mike is a Steven Soderbergh drama about a male stripper who doesn't want to be a stripper anymore. Magic Mike XXL, directed by Gregory Jacobs with Soderbergh as a producer, is a movie about the joys of being a male stripper. While there was a lot of fun to be had in the first movie, the sequel puts that fun at the forefront. It portrays a kind of easygoing, comfortable masculinity that isn't threatened by putting one's body on display for the pleasure of others.
That's the Mikey I remember.
Unsurprisingly, the biggest fans of XXL were women, who flocked to the movie in groups, almost as if they were going to an actual male strip club, albeit one populated by some of the most handsome actors in Hollywood. Visual pleasure is central to film as a medium, and few films have made that pleasure as central or as visceral as Magic Mike XXL. While 2014's Godzilla was a huge improvement over the previous attempt to recreate the Japanese monster for American audiences, it didn't exactly set the world on fire. Godzilla looked great, but the monsters he fought were generic and bore little resemblance to the unforgettable foes he faced in the original Japanese series of films. Furthermore, the soldier played by Aaron Taylor Johnson was equally milquetoast. It was about as forgettable of a human protagonist monster movie as we've ever seen. This was a problem that was made even more glaring by the lack of screen time for the giant lizard everybody had paid to see. Nevertheless, the movie was enough of a hit for Legendary Pictures to move forward with their plans to make Godzilla the center of a MonsterVerse franchise. The next film in that franchise was 2017's Kong Skull Island, but it was a prequel that didn't even involve Godzilla directly. A direct sequel to the 2014 film didn't arrive until Godzilla King of the Monsters in 2019. Fortunately, it arrived with everything Godzilla's previous effort was missing. The classic monsters Mothra, Rodan, and King Ghidorah all made their return to kick off a globe-spanning giant monster battle royale, with the kind of monster-fighting action Godzilla fans crave. King of the Monsters also brought in Kyle Chandler, Vera Farmiga, and Millie Bobby Brown to lead the human cast as a family being torn apart in the midst of the apocalyptic monster conflict. Whether this Americanized series is your cup of tea or not, it's hard to deny that Godzilla King of the Monsters improves on Godzilla on basically every level. House of a Thousand Corpses, the feature directing debut of rocker Rob Zombie, was a fun movie for horror fans. So over the top that it played more like an ultra-violent cartoon than a serious film of any sort. The titular house, occupied by the murderous Firefly family, became a treacherous last stand for two young couples with the misfortune of ending up there on Halloween night. Zombie's tribute to the sort of low-budget grindhouse horror movies he grew up on, the film never really attempted to be more than that. Nevertheless, the film was a success, so Zombie jumped at the opportunity to make a sequel, becoming considerably more ambitious. The Devil's Rejects opens with the destruction of the Firefly house in a police raid, and the movie focuses on 3 family members who escape and go on the lam. While every bit as violent as its predecessor, The Devil's Rejects abandons the cartoonish tone for an atmospheric 1970s inflected road movie with a soundtrack of classic Southern rock. If horrific violence isn't your thing, this movie probably still isn't for you. But if it was the overall ridiculousness of House of a Thousand Corpses that turned you off, The Devil's Rejects might be exactly your thing. Which Wolverine movie was Logan an improvement on? How about practically all of them? The X-Men movie franchise first introduced Hugh Jackman as Logan, the nigh-indestructible mutant with metal claws in 2000's X-Men. Also known as Wolverine, he had his own solo films before James Mangold came along. 2009's X-Men Origins Wolverine and 2013's The Wolverine. However, this Western-tinged goodbye to the character was absolutely transcendent to the point where some regard Logan as not just the best film in the X-Men franchise, but the best superhero movie of them all. In any case, X-Men Origins Wolverine is a nonsensical mess, and The Wolverine is merely a pretty good superhero action movie. Differently, Logan is a genuinely moving story about an aging hero dealing with his own mortality and the apparent loss of the hope he and his fellow X-Men once fought for. Into this apocalyptic landscape arrives Laura, a young girl in need of protection, who has far more in common with Logan than he expected. Naturally, she brings his long-buried heroic spirit back to the fore, and the old man once known as Wolverine makes one last stand. Owing as much to westerns as it does to the X-Men movies, Logan is about as good as superhero films can get. It took the Fast and Furious movies a few installments to figure out exactly what it wanted to be. The first film, 2001's The Fast and the Furious, was a relatively straightforward crime drama set in the world of street racing, starring Paul Walker, Vin Diesel, Michelle Rodriguez, and Jordana Brewster. Only Walker returned for 2003's Too Fast, Too Furious, which filled out the cast with Tyrese Gibson and Chris "Ludacris" Bridges for another story about crime and racing. The third movie, The Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift, left all of the previous characters behind in service of a story about an American teen, played by Lucas Black, involved in street racing in Japan. Tokyo Drift ended with a cameo from Vin Diesel, however, and Drift director Justin Lin would turn out to be instrumental in shaping the franchise's future. He would return, as would Diesel and Walker, for the fourth film, Fast and Furious, and 2011's Fast 5 brought it all together. Justin Lin directed once again, and with Walker, Diesel, Brewster, Tyrese, and Ludacris, the franchise was finally firing on all cylinders. Also along for the ride was Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson as a U.S. government agent hunting the protagonists.
The men we're after are professional runners. They like speed and guaranteed to go down the hardest possible wave, so make sure you got your underwear on.
Fast 5's over-the-top heist plot put the hot rods to new use and became a huge hit, but it also crafted a blueprint for future installments of this series, each going bigger than the last. Even still, Fast 5 is probably still the best, and there's not many franchises that can say the fourth sequel was their best film. The 1968 George Romero classic Night of the Living Dead remains a great film, both on its own merits and as the birth of the modern zombie genre that stands today.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
It's a cross-media cash cow that extends from The Walking Dead to Left 4 Dead to Army of the Dead. Despite an effectively grim atmosphere and talented cast, however, its budget was tiny and ambitions small. Although the zombie problem appears in Night to be widespread, the movie is focused entirely on a small group of people holed up in a rural farmhouse. They are attempting to hold the dead at bay with only vague hints that something far greater is going on in the rest of the world. By the time Romero returned to the zombie narrative for 1978's Dawn of the Dead, he had more resources to play with. After a brutal opening showing how the zombie infestation has devastated low-income communities in Philadelphia, the movie follows two cops and a pair of TV journalists as they flee the city and find refuge in a suburban mall. Although the main cast is even smaller than that of his 1968 film, Romero's reality now feels much bigger, and the threat that much more real. Although the group manages to secure the mall against the hordes, this apocalyptic temple to capitalism wasn't made to serve as a fortress. The tension becomes palpable as the living dead storm the gates. 1995's Bad Boys was the debut movie from Michael Bay. Yes, the rock star music video filmmaker who would reshape Hollywood with his glossy visuals, adrenaline-pumping spectacle-over story aesthetic, and belief that when all else fails, just blow something up. It all began, for better or worse, with this one. Bad Boys stars Will Smith and Martin Lawrence as two reckless cops protecting a witness and trying to find a large amount of heroin that disappeared from their police station. The movie combines comedy and over-the-top action into a frothy thrill ride in cinematic form. It's a style Bay would perfect in the years to come with crowd-pleasing spectacles like The Rock and Armageddon. By the time he made Bad Boys 2 in 2003, Bay was riding high at the top of his game, and that's reflected in the product. Bad Boys 2 was bigger in scale than the first movie, from the explosions to the amount of missing drugs. On the other hand, it didn't forget the importance of Lawrence and Smith's chemistry and the appeal of their characters. Its introduction of Gabrielle Union as Sid added a whole new level of conflict. While Bad Boys was a fun time, every facet of the film was heightened in Bad Boys 2, striking a balance that kept it from being too big or loud, making it simply fun to watch.
Yeah, I can see that.
Although it was a monstrously huge hit at the time, 1989's Batman is, in retrospect, a bit of an odd duck. It's a superhero film, sure, but outside of the Christopher Reeve Superman series, superhero films weren't really much of a defined thing yet. Batman contains a surprising amount of 80s action movie DNA, which pulls it away from the conventions of comic book storytelling. Meaning, there's a villain revealed to be responsible for the hero's parents' deaths, the hero revealing his secrets to his love interest, a climactic fight in a tower that ends with the villain falling to his death. On the other hand, director Tim Burton put a lot of his oddball gothic style into the film. It became distinctive enough to briefly foreshadow a superhero film revolution that wouldn't truly take hold until more than a decade later. By the time he directed 1992's Batman Returns, Burton had a lot more freedom to bend the project to his own aesthetic and narrative whims. Consequently, Batman Returns is also an odd duck, but one with a much clearer vision. It's set at Christmas, with lots of atmospheric snow and statues of angels. The new villain, the Penguin, played by Danny DeVito, is a former circus freak whose henchmen are all weird carnies. The grotesquerie of the Penguin is juxtaposed with the far more appealing, morally ambiguous Catwoman, played by Michelle Pfeiffer, who's both an enemy and a love interest for Batman. Christopher Walken also appears as evil businessman Max Schreck, giving one of the most Walken-esque performances of his life. The whole thing is a weird, spooky, campy delight, and you can tell it's exactly what Burton wanted it to be. Visionary director James Whale didn't want to make a second Frankenstein movie, even though the first had been a smash hit. The studio finally convinced him by letting him do pretty much whatever he wanted. The result was Bride of Frankenstein, an arch, deliberately campy outing that's generally regarded as the first horror comedy. Whale paired the high-strung Dr. Frankenstein with a new scientist named Dr. Pretorius, a proud degenerate who gleefully defies the laws of nature. He also gave the monster the power of speech, which he had in the novel but lacked in the original film. Good. There's still plenty of pathos in Bride, particularly the extremely dark ending, but it's balanced with a levity that the original lacks, making for a much stronger film. This was Whale's last Frankenstein movie and is widely regarded as the highlight of the franchise. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite movies are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.